For 7 days, my daughter's phone rang into silence. On the 8th day, I drove to her house, pressed my ear against the door, and heard something moving inside, and every terrible thing a father's mind can imagine came rushing in like flood water. Welcome back to your ultimate destination for gripping revenge stories, family betrayals, shocking betrayals, and emotional justice. Subscribe now and join a community and tell us where you're watching from. Turn on the notification bell for our next story. Are you ready to witness the ultimate payback? Let's get started. I'm Mr. ZAHA, and I am 68 years old. I want you to understand something about me before this story begins, something that matters, something that shapes everything that follows. I am not a man given to panic. I am not a man who catastrophizes, who spirals, who picks up the phone and calls 3 times when once will do. I spent 40 years building a life in this country from nothing, and the kind of man that requires, the kind of man you have to become to survive that, is a man who is steady, a man who breathes through difficulty, a man who does not shake. I am telling you this because when I finally stood on my daughter Amelia's front porch on a cold Tuesday morning in February, pressing my palm flat against her door and listening to the sound coming from inside, I was shaking so badly that the key I was holding rattled against the lock like a coin in an empty tin can. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start where everything starts, with ordinary life, before it stopped being ordinary. I live alone now in Westfield, New Jersey, in the house I have owned for 22 years. My wife, Miriam, passed 4 years ago, a quiet Tuesday in April, birds outside the window she loved, her hand in mine. The grief of that is something I carry the way you carry an old injury. Always present, occasionally sharp, but mostly just part of the landscape of yourself. You learn to walk with it. You have no other choice. After Miriam, the house became very large. Not physically. It was the same modest 4-bedroom colonial it had always been. But rooms that were once full of sound and movement, and the particular warmth that a woman like Miriam generates simply by existing in a space. Those rooms became quiet in a way that had weight to it. I filled the time with work, with the occasional visit from friends, with my garden and my books and my twice-weekly calls to my children. My children. 2 of them. Benjamin, my son, who is 35 and has had his own complicated journey, but that is a different story for a different day. And Amelia. Amelia Rose ZAHA, 32 years old, who has been the steadiest thing in my life since her mother died. I need you to understand who Amelia is, because this story is about her, and she deserves to be seen clearly before the fear of losing her takes over the telling. Amelia is the kind of person who remembers things. Not in the ordinary sense. Everyone remembers things. I mean, she remembers the things that matter to other people. She remembers that her college roommate's mother had a biopsy scheduled in March and sends a text asking how it went. She remembers that the elderly man 2 doors down from me, Mr. Carroll, takes his walk at 8 in the morning, and when there's ice on the sidewalk, she calls me to ask if I've salted the path between our properties so he doesn't slip. She remembered, every year without exception, to call me on the anniversary of my arrival in America. Not my birthday, not Father's Day, but the specific date in September 1981 when I stepped off a plane at JFK with $43 and a secondhand suitcase, because she said that was the day that made everything else possible and it deserved to be marked. She is a librarian, head of children's services at the Milburn Public Library, a position she has held for 5 years and which suits her in the way that the right work suits certain people, not just as a job, but as an expression of who they already are. She reads to children on Saturday mornings in a voice that could settle a room full of caffeinated 4-year-olds, and she curates the young adult collection with a seriousness that I find both amusing and deeply endearing. She lives alone in a small, well-kept house in Maplewood, 20 minutes from me, close enough for comfort, far enough for independence. She has a cat named Gerald, after my attorney, because Amelia has a particular sense of humor that delights in things only she and the person she loves will find funny. She has a small circle of close friends, a reliable routine, and a phone that is almost always answered within 2 rings when I call. Almost always. The first time I called and got voicemail, it was a Wednesday evening in the first week of February. I left a message. Amelia and I spoke every Tuesday and Thursday without exception. This was our arrangement, had been for 4 years, established in the weeks after Miriam's funeral when we had both recognized, without quite saying it, that we needed the anchor of regular contact. We were each other's continuity. The person who proved, twice a week, that the other was still there. When she didn't call back by Thursday morning, I called again. Voicemail. I told myself she was busy. She had mentioned a big library event coming up, a winter reading program launch, something she had been planning for months. I told myself she was buried in it, that she had lost track of time, that she would surface soon and call me laughing about how chaotic the week had been. By Friday evening, I had called 4 times. All voicemail. I texted. Read receipts, showed my messages were delivered but not read. Saturday came. I called twice more. I called her friend Diana, who had been Amelia's closest friend since college. A warm, practical woman whom I trusted and who, I was certain, would be able to tell me in 30 seconds whether I was worrying unnecessarily. Diana answered immediately. Mr. ZAHA. Her voice was careful in a way that careful voices are when they are trying not to transmit alarm. I actually haven't heard from her since last Tuesday either. I figured she was just, you know how she gets when she's deep in a project. She goes quiet. She does, I said. But she doesn't go quiet with me. A pause. Have you tried the library? Diana asked. I had not. I called the Milburn Public Library on Saturday morning and asked to speak to Amelia ZAHA. The woman who answered, a young staff member I recognized from a previous visit, told me, after a brief hold, that Amelia had called in sick on Wednesday, and they hadn't heard from her since. She had missed 3 scheduled shifts. They had tried to reach her as well. She had called in sick on Wednesday. The day after our last regular call, the last call I had reached her on, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday conversation about nothing in particular, about Gerald the cat knocking a plan off the windowsill and the winter reading program, and whether I was eating properly. That Tuesday conversation was the last time I heard my daughter's voice. Sunday. Monday. I drove past her house both days. Her car was in the driveway. The lights were off. The curtains were drawn. I knocked both times. Hard. Loud. The knock of a man who is no longer being casual about his concern. No answer. I called her doctor's office. Privacy laws prevented them from telling me anything. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. Unreachable for 5 days, missed work shifts, car and driveway. The officer I spoke to was courteous and measured. He said that without evidence of an emergency or a crime, they could not do a welfare check based solely on missed calls, but that if I was genuinely concerned I could go to the station in person and file a formal request. I drove to the station. I filed the request. I sat across from a young officer with a clipboard and I described my daughter, 32 years old, librarian, reliable, never gone silent before, car and driveway, missed 3 work shifts, and I heard my own voice remain steady because I had no other way to make this man understand the urgency except through calm, and calm was the only language left to me. He said someone would follow up within 48 hours. 48 hours. I drove home and sat at my kitchen table in the dark for a long time. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week since the last time I had heard Amelia's voice, I got up before dawn, made coffee I didn't drink, and drove to Maplewood. I was done waiting. I parked in front of her house at 7:15 in the morning. Her car was still in the driveway. The curtains were still drawn. The house had the particular stillness of a place that has been closed against the world for too long, the kind of stillness that has texture to it, that you can feel from the street. I walked up the porch steps. I raised my hand to knock, and that was when I heard it. From inside the house, muffled but unmistakable, the sound of scratching. Something moving. Something alive, scraping against a surface, rhythmic and desperate. My hand dropped from the door. My heart, which I had been holding carefully for 7 days, lurched sideways in my chest. I reached into my coat pocket for the key Amelia had given me 3 years ago, just in case, Dad, because I know you'll worry, and my hands, the steady hands of a man who does not shake, were shaking. If you've ever experienced those terrible 7 seconds between knowing something is wrong and finding out what it is, drop a comment right now. Because what was waiting for me behind that door changed everything I thought I understood about my daughter, about silence, and about the things we hide from the people who love us most. The key turned on the second try. The first try failed because my hand was shaking too badly to seat it properly in the lock, and I had to stop, press my palm flat against the cold wood of the door, breathe once, and try again. The click of the tumblers engaging was the loudest sound I had ever heard in my life. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, stale air, the close, warm staleness of a space that had been sealed against the outside world for days. And underneath it, something else. Something medicinal. Sharp and faintly chemical in a way that made my chest constrict before my brain had fully processed what I was walking into. The entryway was dim, the curtains throughout the house were drawn, and the only light came from the thin gray February morning pressing through the gaps at the edges of the windows. Amelia's coat was on the hook by the door, her boots on the mat beneath it, her keys on the small table to the left, exactly where she always left them. She was here. She was home. The scratching was coming from the hallway to my right, toward the bedroom. Amelia. My voice came out wrong. Too loud, too tight. I cleared my throat. Amelia, it's Dad. I'm here. Silence from the bedroom. Then, the scratching again, and with it, a small sound. A thin, plaintive sound that I recognized after a disoriented moment as Gerald. The cat. Gerald was behind the bedroom door, pawing at it, crying in the low, insistent way cats cry when they have been confined too long and are asking, with the particular dignity of cats, to be released. I crossed the hallway in 4 steps and pushed open the bedroom door. Gerald shot out past my ankles like a small, orange missile, disappearing toward the kitchen without looking back. I stood in the doorway of my daughter's bedroom. Amelia was in the bed. She was alive. I could see the movement of her breathing from the doorway, the slow rise and fall of the blanket pulled up to her chin, and the relief of that, of simply seeing her chest move, was so overwhelming that I had to grip the doorframe. I gripped it hard enough that the wood bit into my palm, and I was grateful for it, because I needed something real and solid to hold on to while the world stopped tilting. She was alive, but she was not well. Even from the doorway, I could see the fever. Her face was flushed and damp, her hair clinging to her forehead in dark strands. The small table beside the bed was crowded, a water glass, nearly empty, a bottle of over-the-counter cold medication, a second bottle, prescription, I noticed, and I crossed the room to read the label. Antibiotics. Prescribed 6 days ago from an urgent care clinic in Milburn. 6 days ago. 2 days before I had started calling. Amelia. I sat on the edge of the bed and put my hand on her forehead. She was burning. The heat of her skin against my palm was alarming. Not the warm flush of a mild fever, but the deep, radiating heat of a body working very hard against something serious. Amelia, sweetheart, open your eyes. She stirred. Her eyelids moved. She made a small sound, confused, groggy, the sound of someone surfacing from a very deep place. Dad. Her voice was barely there, hoarse and thin and bewildered. Her eyes opened, unfocused for a moment, and then found my face, and something in them shifted. Not quite relief. More like the expression of a person who has been alone with something frightening for so long that the arrival of another human being is almost incomprehensible. I'm here, I said. My hand was still on her forehead. I didn't move it. I'm right here. Dad. She swallowed painfully. Her voice cracked. I lost my phone. I dropped it in the bathroom, and the screen cracked, and it stopped. I couldn't, she stopped. Closed her eyes. Opened them again. I've been so sick. I couldn't. I kept meaning to get up and find a way to call you, but every time I tried to get up Stop, I said gently. Don't explain. We'll get to all of that. Right now I need to know what the doctor said. She had gone to the urgent care clinic the previous Wednesday morning, the morning after our last call, because she had woken that morning barely able to swallow and had driven herself, because she was Amelia, because even when she was ill she handled things quietly and without asking for help. The urgent care doctor had diagnosed a severe throat infection, streptococcal, confirmed by a rapid test, and had prescribed a 10-day course of antibiotics along with rest and fluids. She had driven herself home, filled the prescription, and gone to bed. And then her phone had slipped off the bathroom counter, cracked its screen against the tile floor, and stopped functioning entirely. She had been alone in this house, with a high fever, no working phone, and no way to reach anyone, for 6 days. 6 days. My daughter, 32 years old, burning with fever, with an empty water glass and a cat who had kept vigil outside her bedroom door and had, in his own small way, been the sound that finally told me she was alive. I looked at Gerald, who had returned to the bedroom doorway and was sitting with his tail wrapped around his paws, watching me with the steady, ancient judgment of cats. Good boy, I said. Gerald blinked once, as though accepting the acknowledgement, and began to wash his face. I filled Amelia's water glass. I checked the antibiotics. She had taken them irregularly, missing doses when she couldn't manage to get up. I found crackers in the kitchen cupboard and brought them back. I sat beside her while she drank and tried to eat, doing both slowly, carefully, with the effortful deliberateness of someone who has been horizontal for too long. "Dad," she said after a while. "You're crying." I touched my face. She was right. I hadn't noticed. "I'm not crying," I said, which was entirely untrue, and she knew it. And the small, weak laugh she produced in response was the most beautiful sound I had heard in 7 days. "You were scared," she said softly. "I was terrified," I said, because she was Amelia, and she deserved the truth without the performance of stoicism. "I have been terrified for 7 days." She reached out from under the blanket and put her hand over mine on the edge of the bed. Her hand was hot and dry and small in the way that Miriam's hand had been small, and I turned mine over and held it. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said. "I should have had a backup way to reach you. I should have. I kept thinking someone would check on me, and then I was too sick to think clearly," and her voice cracked. "Not from the fever. From something else. I kept thinking, he doesn't know I'm sick. He's probably worried. And I couldn't do anything about it. And that scared me almost as much as being sick." "You were thinking about me," I said, "while you were sick." "You're my dad," she said, as if this explained everything. And it did. I sat with her for the next several hours. I called her doctor, the urgent care clinic first, then her regular physician, who, once I explained the situation and the length of the fever, asked a series of brisk questions and then advised that if the fever did not begin to come down by evening, she needed to go to the emergency room. I bought a new phone charger at the CVS 2 blocks away when I discovered hers had slipped behind the nightstand, and that, I now realized, was the likely reason her existing phone had died even before the screen cracked, a cascading failure of small things that had combined into an enormous silence. I called Diana. Her intake of breath when I told her what had happened, the relief and the guilt of it compressed into a single sound, told me she had been carrying her own version of my fear all week. "Is she okay?" Diana asked. "She will be," I said. "Can I come?" "Give her a day," I said. "Let her rest. Then come." By early afternoon, Amelia's fever had begun, slowly, to come down. Not dramatically. The thermometer moved from 103.4 to 102.1 over the course of 4 hours, which her doctor, when I called to report, said was a positive sign. She slept more, real sleep now rather than the restless semi-consciousness I had found her in. I sat in the chair beside her bed and read, and when she woke I was there, and the knowledge that I was there seemed to help in a way that had nothing to do with medicine. Gerald stationed himself on the foot of the bed and did not move. That evening, as the light faded outside the curtains and I was making soup from what I could find in her kitchen, I heard Amelia call from the bedroom. "Dad, right here," I called back. A pause. "Can you come sit with me for a minute?" I turned off the stove and went. She was sitting up slightly, her color better than it had been but still fragile looking, her hair pulled back, the new phone I had bought her, charged now to 40%, resting on the blanket beside her. She had been looking at it when I came in, and she looked up at me with an expression I did not immediately recognize. Not the relief of earlier, not the grateful exhaustion of someone being cared for. Something more complicated. Something that told me the fever was only the surface of this story. "Dad," she said, "there's something I need to tell you. Stay with me, because I need to stop here and ask, when was the last time someone you loved said those words to you, and your whole body went still?" Drop a comment below, because what Amelia told me next had nothing to do with the fever, and everything to do with why she had been disappearing long before her phone broke. I sat in the chair beside her bed. The soup was cooling on the stove. Gerald had relocated to the windowsill, where he sat looking out at the dark February street, as if he knew this conversation required privacy. The room was lit by the small lamp on the bedside table, and in its warm, limited light, my daughter looked young in a way that sometimes startled me. Young and tired and caught between something she needed to say and something she had clearly been working very hard not to say. I did not rush her. That is one of the things I learned in 40 years of business, that silence, properly held, creates more space than any question. People will fill silence when they are ready. Pressure only teaches them to fill it with whatever stops the pressure, not with what is true. So I waited. Amelia looked at her hands in her lap for a long moment. Then she looked at me. I haven't been okay, she said. For a while? I haven't been okay for a while, and I've been very careful not to let you know. I kept my face still. My hands were folded in my lap, and I kept them there, kept them loose, kept everything in my body as non-threatening and patient as I could make it. How long is a while? I asked. She thought about this. Honestly, about 2 years. Maybe a little more. 2 years. 2 years of twice-weekly phone calls, of Sunday dinners when she drove to Westfield, of the reading program and the library events and Gerald's antics, and the easy, loving rhythm of a relationship I had genuinely believed, was one of the most honest things in my life. 2 years of something being wrong that I had not seen. Tell me, I said. She told me. It had started, she said, in the winter that followed Miriam's death. She had been the capable one during that period, the one who made the arrangements, managed the details, held my hand in Benjamin's and her own grief simultaneously, because she was Amelia, because she had always been the one who made sure everyone else was all right. She had gone back to work 2 weeks after the funeral, reassured her colleagues and her friends and me that she was managing, and had believed it herself, mostly because she was busy, and busy is an excellent disguise. What she hadn't recognized, what took her months to understand, was that grief she hadn't let herself feel doesn't disappear. It goes somewhere else. It finds a room in the house of you and closes the door and sits there, and every time you walk past that door you feel the weight of it, and after a while the weight becomes so familiar that you stop recognizing it as weight. You just think, this is how I feel. This is who I am now. She had started having what she described as bad periods, stretches of 2 or 3 weeks where getting out of bed required a kind of effort she couldn't explain to anyone, where the things that had always given her pleasure, reading, her work with the children, cooking, calling me, became things she had to perform rather than experience. She would do them because she had always done them, because they were expected, because she was Amelia and Amelia was fine. But the doing was hollow. The joy had moved to the other side of a glass wall she couldn't see through. I kept waiting for it to pass, she said. The first time it happened, I told myself it was grief. It was winter, I was tired, I'd just lost Mom. It made sense. And then it did pass, mostly, and I thought I was right. And then it came back. The second time, she had made an appointment with a therapist. She had gone twice and then canceled, because the twice-weekly calls to me fell on Tuesday and Thursday, and she had unconsciously scheduled both therapy sessions on those days, and then found herself unable to reschedule, and she recognized now that the scheduling conflict was not entirely accidental. You were using our calls as a reason not to go, I said quietly. She nodded. I didn't know that at the time. I know it now. She had started struggling with sleep, then with appetite. She had lost weight that she didn't have to lose. I thought back, suddenly, to the last several months of dinners, to the way she had pushed food around her plate in a way I had attributed to being busy, to being tired, to the particular distraction of someone whose mind is always on several things at once. I had not seen it. I had sat across from my daughter, week after week, and I had not seen it. The self-recrimination must have shown on my face, because she leaned forward. Dad, stop. I looked at her. I know what you're doing, she said. You're deciding it's your fault. That you should have seen it. That you should have known. That you failed somehow. She shook her head, a small, deliberate movement. You didn't fail. I worked very hard to make sure you wouldn't see it. I was good at it. I had a lot of practice. Why? I said. The question came out quieter and more exposed than I intended. Why did you work so hard to hide it from me? Amelia, I would have. I know what you would have done, she said, and her voice was gentle but firm in the way that Miriam's voice had sometimes been gentle but firm when she was making a point she needed me to actually hear. You would have dropped everything. You would have shown up with soup and called doctors and sat in the chair and made sure I was taken care of. You would have worried. You had just lost Mom. You were already carrying so much, and she stopped, looked at her hands again. I decided you didn't have room for my falling apart. The room was very quiet. I had room, I said. I always have room. I know, she said. I know that now. But 2 years ago I convinced myself otherwise, and it was a mistake, Dad. I've been learning, lately, that it was a mistake. She told me about the therapist she had finally started seeing 4 months ago, really seeing, consistently, once a week, a woman named Dr. Reeves in South Orange who she had found through a recommendation from her own doctor when the bad periods had become long enough and close enough together that she had been scared to stay quiet about it any longer. Dr. Reeves had, after a careful assessment, diagnosed her with what she described as moderate depression, likely grief-triggered and sustained by the isolation of not having disclosed it to the people closest to her. Sustained by the isolation. She had been treating herself in the way that exhausted people treat wounds without proper medicine, with bandages that covered the problem without addressing it. The performance of fineness. The twice-weekly calls where she made me laugh with stories about Gerald and asked me questions about my garden and my week and listened carefully and warmly and gave nothing of her actual interior away. She was a librarian. She knew how to cure it. She had curated herself, very carefully, for 2 years, and only now, stripped down by fever, unable to maintain the performance, caught in the honest vulnerability of someone who has been sick and alone and frightened, was the curation slipping. The reason I didn't reach out this week, she said, even when I was sick. I mean, yes, my phone broke. That's real. But even before the phone broke, I had a moment on Tuesday night where I thought about calling you. And there was this voice that said, "You're fine. You can handle this. He doesn't need to know. Don't be a burden." Her jaw tightened. That voice has been very loud for 2 years. Dr. Reeves and I have been working on it. Is it getting quieter? I asked. She considered. Some days. Tuesday night it was not. I sat with everything she had told me. I sat with the weight of it. Not the weight of grief or of betrayal. Nothing like what I had faced with Benjamin, but a different kind of weight. The weight of love that has been too careful. Love that has been so focused on protecting the other person from pain that it has made itself invisible, and in making itself invisible, has been quietly suffering alone. I thought about Miriam. I thought about how she had sometimes said to me, gently, in the specific way she saved for things she needed me to truly hear. "ZAHA, you taught the children that the way to love you is to be strong. Make sure you also teach them that it's safe to be not strong." I had thought I understood what she meant. I understood it more completely now. "I owe you an apology," I said. Amelia looked up, startled. "What? Dad, no, this isn't. Listen to me." I leaned forward in the chair. "I spent 40 years teaching you, by example, that strength means carrying things alone, that asking for help is a concession, that the measure of a person is their ability to handle their own difficulties without burdening others." I looked at her steadily. "Your mother tried to tell me that was the wrong lesson. She was right. And I am looking at you now, my daughter, who has been fighting something real and difficult for 2 years, and I am looking at the part one played in teaching you to fight it alone. That is worth an apology." She was quiet for a long moment. "We're a pair, aren't we?" she said finally. "We are. I'm getting better," she said. "I want you to know that. The therapy is, Dr. Reeves is helping. I started medication 6 weeks ago. It's early, but I think it's working. The bad periods are shorter. The glass wall isn't as thick." She looked at me with those eyes that were Miriam's eyes in so many ways it still sometimes arrested me. "I'm working on it, Dad. I was working on it alone, and I shouldn't have been." "No," I said. "You shouldn't have been. I'm going to tell you now," she said. "I'm going to stop curating. I'm going to call you when it's bad, not just when it's manageable. Even when it's scary. Even when I know it'll worry you." "It will worry me," I said. "And that is my problem to carry, not yours. You let me worry. You let me in. That's all I need." Gerald dropped from the windowsill to the foot of the bed and began methodically kneading the blanket, staring at neither of us, studiously maintaining the dignity of a cat who was not listening. Amelia laughed, a real laugh, tired and weak, but genuinely warm. "He always does that when there's too much emotion in the room." "Smart cat," I said. "He is. He's been sitting outside my bedroom door every morning waiting for me to be well enough to feed him. He never once stopped checking. He came to get me," I said quietly. She looked at me. "The scratching," I said. "That's what I heard when I came to the door. He was scratching at the bedroom door." If I hadn't heard that, I stopped. "He came to get me." Amelia looked at Gerald with an expression of such pure, uncomplicated love that my chest hurt. "Good boy," she whispered. Gerald paused his kneading, looked at her with the ancient serenity of a creature who has always known his own worth, and went back to work on the blanket. Outside, the February wind pressed against the windows of the small house in Maplewood. The soup was cold on the stove. The lamp made its small circle of warmth. And in that circle, my daughter and I were beginning, finally, to be honest with each other about the things we had been protecting each other from. The things that, in their protection, had grown heavier than they needed to be. But there was still something I hadn't said. Something that had been living in me for the past several hours, growing louder. Something that was going to require its own kind of courage. I need to pause here because I know some of you watching this are carrying something you haven't told the people who love you. If that's you, comment below. You don't have to say what it is. Just say I hear you. Because what comes next is about what happens when we finally stop protecting each other from the truth. I went back to the kitchen and reheated the soup. It was a simple act, turning the burner back on, finding a bowl in the cupboard she had always kept to the left of the sink, the same side Miriam had kept hers, but I needed the minutes it took. I needed the ordinary business of a spoon and a pot and steam rising in a cold kitchen to give my hands something to do while my mind sorted through everything Amelia had told me and everything I had not yet told her. Because here is the truth of it. My daughter had spent 2 years protecting me from her pain because she had decided I was too fragile to carry it. That I was too burdened, too grieving, too far along in the architecture of my own loss to be trusted with hers. And the reason she had believed that, the reason that calculation had made sense to her, at 29, freshly bereaved, watching her father move through the first terrible months of widowhood, was that I had not shown her otherwise. I had been strong. I had managed. I had handled Miriam's estate and the funeral arrangements and the thank you notes and the subsequent weeks with the steady, capable competence that I had always deployed in the face of difficulty, because that was who I was. Because that was the man I had built myself into over 40 years of hard choices. I had not let her see me fall apart. Not once. I had not let her see me cry except at the very end, at the bedside. I had not called her at 2 in the morning when the house was enormous and silent and Miriam's absence was a physical thing I walked into in every dark room. I had not told her about the weeks when I ate the same 3 foods on rotation because the thought of cooking for one was too specific a grief to navigate. I had not told her that I had started, briefly and then with increasing frequency, talking to Miriam's photograph in the kitchen, not pathologically, not from confusion, but because 41 years of marriage creates a conversational habit that does not simply end when one party is no longer there to answer. I had protected her from all of that, because she had just lost her mother, and I was her father, and fathers absorb. Fathers redirect. Fathers stand between their children and the harder weather of the world. But Amelia was not a child. She was 32 years old. And in protecting her from my grief, I had modeled for her, powerfully, consistently, without intending to, that the way we operated in this family was by carrying things alone. That was the lesson I had taught, and she had learned it perfectly. I brought the soup back to the bedroom. She took it and ate slowly, more steadily than before, the color continuing to return to her face. I sat in the chair. And when she had eaten about half of it, and set the bowl on the nightstand and looked at me with the steady, waiting patience that was so purely her, so purely the quality I had loved most in her since she was small, the capacity to wait for what mattered, I began to talk. I told her about the 2 in the morning hours, the dark rooms. I told her about talking to Miriam's photograph, about how it had started as something I was embarrassed by and had become something I had come to accept as simply one of the many ways grief finds a shape in you that is specific to your own architecture. I told her about the Tuesday, 5 months after the funeral, when I had gotten into my car to drive to the hardware store and had sat in the driveway for 45 minutes because I could not identify a reason to move. Not depression, not what she had described, but a kind of profound, specific exhaustion of purpose. I had been moving toward things for 40 years, building toward things, working toward a future. And the primary person I had been building it for, the woman who was my partner and my witness and the one for whom all of it had its deepest meaning, was gone. And the question of what I was moving toward now, at 64, and then 65 and 66, was one I had not answered and had not known how to ask. She was very still while I talked. The soup bowl cooling beside her, Gerald a warm, steady weight at the foot of the bed. "Dad?" she said, when I had been quiet for a moment. Her voice was soft with something that wasn't pity. Amelia had never been a person who pitied. It was something more like recognition. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" "Because you had just lost your mother," I said. "Because you were grieving." Because I am your father, and my job is not to be invincible, she said. I stopped. Your job, she said carefully, is to be honest with me. That's what you told me tonight. That you always have room. That I should call you when it's bad, not just when it's manageable. She held my gaze. That goes both ways, Dad. It has to go both ways. I sat with that. She was right. Of course she was right. She had her mother's precision for the things that needed to be said directly and the patience to wait until the right moment to say them. You're going to make me cry again, I said. You're allowed to, she said simply. So I did. Not dramatically. I am not a man built for dramatic weeping. But sitting in that chair in the lamplight, in my daughter's bedroom in Maplewood, New Jersey, on a cold February night, I let myself cry in front of her in a way I had not allowed in 4 years of grief. And she did not try to fix it or minimize it or redirect it. She just watched me with those steady, Miriam eyes and let it be what it was. After a while I wiped my face. I should have told you, I said. A long time ago. I should have let you see that it was hard. Yes, she said. You should have. I was afraid, I said. And this was perhaps the most honest thing I had said in years. Not about fear of loss or fear of failure, but this specific, intimate fear. I was afraid that if you saw me struggling, you'd spend your energy taking care of me instead of taking care of yourself. I was trying to protect you. I know, she said. And I was trying to protect you. And we've both been alone with things we didn't need to be alone with. She tilted her head slightly. We're very good at taking care of each other and very bad at letting each other do it. Your mother would have sorted this out in about 20 minutes, I said. She laughed, really laughed this time, the laugh that came from deep down, the one that sounded like Miriam's laugh. She would have locked us in a room together and told us to stop being ridiculous. She would have used different language, I said. She would absolutely have used different language. Amelia agreed, and we were both laughing now, quietly, with the specific warmth of two people laughing at someone they loved who is no longer there to be laughed with. The laughter settled. The room was quiet again, but differently quiet now. A quietness that had been cleared of something, swept of the particular weight of unspoken things. I want to come to therapy with you, I said, if Dr. Reeves allows it. Not to sit in on your sessions, those are yours. But family therapy. Separately or together, whatever Dr. Reeves thinks is appropriate. I want to be part of the process, Amelia. Not as the person you're protecting. As your father who is also figuring things out. She looked at me for a long moment. You do that, she said. Not skeptically, genuinely surprised. I should have done it years ago, I said. I'll call Monday. Something shifted in her face. The last of the curation dropped away, and what was underneath it was something open and young and deeply relieved. The face of a woman who had been carrying a heavy thing for a long time and had just felt someone else's hand close around part of the weight. Okay, she said, quietly. Okay, Dad. I reached over and squeezed her hand. She squeezed back and did not let go. We sat like that for a while. Gerald made his slow way up from the foot of the bed to the space between us, turned 3 times, and settled. His purr filled the small room like a second heartbeat. I need to ask you something, I said, after a while. Okay. Dr. Reeves. Do you trust her? Amelia considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. Yes, she said. She's very direct, and she doesn't let me get away with the curating. She sees through it pretty quickly. Good, I said. That's what you need. She reminds me of you. Actually, Amelia said, in the way she waits. She does the same thing you do, where she just doesn't fill the silence, and you end up saying the real thing because it's the only thing left. I felt that land in my chest, not with pain, but with something warmer. The idea that something of me had been useful to my daughter in a way neither of us had consciously identified. Then she's an excellent therapist, I said. She is. I stood up. The evening had grown late, and Amelia's eyes were growing heavy again. The good heaviness of a body finally beginning to rest properly. I took the soup bowl to the kitchen and washed it. I checked the medication and left the next dose on the nightstand with a full glass of water. I found an extra blanket in the hall closet and laid it across the foot of the bed. Amelia watched me do all of this with the quiet acceptance of someone who has finally, tonight, allowed themselves to be taken care of. Are you staying? She asked. The couch, I said. Dad, the couch, Amelia. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the spare blanket is in the... I found it. Okay. Her eyes were closing. Dad, I'm here. I'm glad you came, she said. I'm glad you didn't wait another day. I turned off the lamp. In the dark, her breathing slowed and deepened. Gerald settled at her feet. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at my daughter in the dark, listening to her breathe. This simple, ordinary, everything sound. And I thought about the 7 days of silence, and the scratching at the door, and the fever, and everything she had told me, and everything I had told her. I thought about what Miriam had said about strength and permission, about teaching children it was safe to be not strong. I thought, it is not too late. Even now, even at 68, even after 4 years of getting it wrong, it is not too late to learn a better way to love the people who are still here. I need you to comment right now, because this is the moment that changed everything between us, and I want to know, have you ever realized you were protecting someone in a way that was actually keeping you apart? Have you ever had to unlearn the way you love someone? Tell me below, because the way this story ends is going to show you what happens when two people finally choose honesty over protection. Amelia's fever broke on Thursday morning. I know this because I was there, sleeping on her couch with one ear tuned to the sounds of the house the way I had slept when she was an infant, the particular vigilance of a parent that does not entirely switch off even when the child is 32 years old. I heard her moving around in the early hours, heard the bathroom tap, and then heard the distinctive, board-creaking shuffle of someone making their way to the kitchen, and I sat up. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her robe and her thick socks, her hair loose and damp from what must have been the first real sweat of the fever breaking. She looked, not well, not yet, but different. The deep flush was gone. Her eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been since I'd arrived. She looked at me on her couch, blinking. "You're still here," she said. Surprised, even though she had known I would be. "I'm still here," I confirmed. She went to the kitchen without another word, and I heard her filling the kettle. After a moment she appeared back in the doorway. "Tea," she said. "Please." We sat at her kitchen table in the early morning gray, both of us in the quiet that follows something difficult. The specific quiet of people who have said hard, true things to each other and are now living in the new space those things have made. Gerald was on the counter, which he was not supposed to be on, and neither of us said anything about it. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Like I lost a fight," she said. "But like the other guy feels worse." "That's progress." She wrapped both hands around her mug. Outside, the February morning was beginning to define itself. Pale light finding the outlines of the oak tree in her backyard, the frost on the grass. "I've been thinking," she said. I waited. "About what you said last night. About the 2 in the morning. About the photograph." She looked at her tea. "I want you to know that I wish you had told me. I want you to know that hearing it, even though it was hard, it made me feel less alone with my own stuff. Because I kept thinking my struggle was somehow separate from yours, like it was a different category of difficulty. And hearing you talk about it reminded me that we were both just people trying to figure out how to live without her." She looked up. "We could have been figuring that out together. We can start now," I said. "We can start now," she agreed. What followed over the next several days was unremarkable in the way that genuinely important things are sometimes unremarkable on the surface. I stayed through the weekend. I cooked, real cooking, not just soup, the Miriam recipes I had learned reluctantly and imperfectly over the years of doing them alone. I walked to the pharmacy twice. I learned the names of Amelia's work colleagues through the texts she began exchanging with them as she recovered. The relief in those texts palpable even through a phone screen. Diana came on Friday evening with flowers and homemade food, and the particular warmth of a woman who had been frightened for her friend and was now channeling that fear into practical abundance. She hugged Amelia for a long time in the doorway, and then hugged me, which I had not expected, and said, "I'm so glad you went over, Mr. ZAHA," into my shoulder. "So am I," said. On Saturday, when Amelia was well enough to sit up for more than an hour without exhaustion making her horizontal again, she called Dr. Reeves and left a message explaining that she had been ill and missed a session and would be back the following Tuesday. Then she handed the phone to me. "Leave your number," she said. "Tell her you want to speak with her when she calls back." I did. Dr. Reeves called on Sunday morning. She was direct and warm and asked me 3 careful questions before she said anything else, and I understood immediately why Amelia trusted her. We arranged to speak at length the following week, and she mentioned, with the matter-of-fact ease of a person for whom these things were entirely ordinary, that family involvement in treatment was often very helpful and she looked forward to discussing what that might look like. "She's going to like you," Amelia said when I relayed this. "She might revise that opinion after she meets me properly," I said. Amelia shook her head. "She's good with stubborn old men who love their kids too much." "I am not stubborn," I said. Amelia looked at me with her mother's exact expression. "Okay," I said. "I am somewhat stubborn." The harder conversation came on Sunday afternoon. Not between Amelia and me. We had, in the slow accumulation of days, found our way to something new between us, something that had the structural integrity of honesty rather than the structural integrity of performance. No, the harder conversation was the one Amelia initiated, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, Gerald installed in her lap, about what she thought I needed for myself. Not for her. For me. She began by asking me, carefully and directly, whether I had spoken to anyone since Miriam's death. Not friends, not family, anyone professional. A grief counselor, a therapist, a doctor who had asked the real questions. I had not. I had, in 4 years, spoken to my regular physician about my blood pressure and my back and the cholesterol that required monitoring. And I had spoken to Gerald Morse about my estate and Patricia Okafor about Benjamin. And I had spoken to Amelia and to Diana and to my old business associates and to the neighborhood friends with whom I occasionally played cards on a Friday. I had spoken to Miriam's photograph in the kitchen. I had not spoken to anyone who was trained to help me navigate what 4 years of grief actually does to a person. "I'm not diagnosing you," Amelia said carefully. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not looking at you and seeing what I see in myself. I'm looking at you and seeing a man who has been handling things alone for 4 years because that is how you were built and because everyone around you let you. Because you are very good at projecting competence." She paused. "And I'm asking you, not as someone who's worried you're falling apart, but as someone who loves you and has just spent 2 years learning what it costs to not ask for help. I'm asking you to consider that you might benefit from talking to someone." I looked at my daughter. At the steadiness in her face, the new steadiness, the one that was built on honesty rather than performance. "Your mother used to say the same thing," I said. "In different words." "I know," Amelia said. "She told me." "That surprised me." "She told you." "A few weeks before she died," Amelia said, "when she was still having clear days. She told me." She stopped, composed herself. "She told me that you were the strongest person she knew and that strength was sometimes your most dangerous quality. That you could carry too much for too long without knowing you were bending." She held my gaze. She said, "When I'm gone, watch your father. He'll say he's fine. He won't entirely be." The kitchen was very quiet. Miriam had told our daughter to watch me, had trusted Amelia with that, in one of her last clear days, because she knew what I was like, because she had spent 41 years knowing exactly what I was like, and she had prepared, as much as she could, for the gap she knew she was leaving. I felt her in the room. Not supernaturally. I am not a superstitious man. But in the way that the people we have loved most persistently are present in everything. In the specific words our children choose. In the things they hold on to for years, and then produce at exactly the right moment. Miriam was present in Amelia's steady eyes and careful voice, and in the love underneath the conversation. The love that would not let me be alone with things I didn't need to be alone with. "She was right," I said. "She was right, and I would have told her she was wrong." "She knew that too," Amelia said. She was half smiling, half crying, and it was the most Miriam expression I had ever seen on any face that wasn't Miriam's. "I'll make an appointment," I said. She nodded. "Not because I'm falling apart," I said. "I know. Because she was right, and it's 4 years past time, and your mother has apparently been communicating through you from beyond the grave." Amelia laughed, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Gerald, disturbed by the vibration of her laughing, stepped off her lap with an offended air and relocated to the windowsill. "I'll find someone I trust," I said. "I'll actually go." "I'll hold you to that," she said. "I'm going to ask you about it at every call." I would expect nothing less. Spring came to Maplewood in the way springs come after difficult winters, tentatively at first, then with sudden confidence. Amelia's garden, which I had noticed in February as a frost-hardened rectangle of empty beds, began to fill in March with the first green things pushing up from the soil. Tulips she had planted the previous fall, a lilac bush along the fence that erupted in purple in early April. She told me, one Tuesday in April, that her bad periods were becoming rare. that the glass wall was thinner, that there were weeks, whole weeks, when the joy of her work, her friends, her garden, her ridiculous cat was genuinely and fully accessible and not performed. She said this not triumphantly, but carefully, the way you hold good news that you're afraid to startle. I told her that I had been seeing my therapist, a man named Dr. Abrams who worked from an office in Westfield and who had the bearing of someone who had heard every variety of human difficulty and was therefore surprised by none of it. I had been going for 6 weeks. It was, I told Amelia, harder than I had expected and more useful than I had been willing to admit. Dr. Abrams had said something in our 3rd session that I had been turning over ever since. That grief that is not expressed finds expression anyway, in ways you don't choose. That the cost of carrying too much alone is paid whether you acknowledge it or not. The only question is how consciously and on what terms. I was choosing, now, to be more conscious, more honest, more willing to be, occasionally, the person who needed rather than always the person who provided. It was not comfortable. It did not come naturally. I was 68 years old, and I had been a certain kind of man for the whole of my adult life, and changing how you operate at 68 is not the same as changing at 28. It is slower. It requires more patience with yourself. Dr. Abrams called it exactly that, patience with yourself, and I was practicing it, imperfectly and regularly. In May, I drove to Maplewood to help Amelia build raised garden beds in her backyard. She had been talking about it for years, and I had the tools and the knowledge. And the Saturday was clear and warm in the particular clean way of a New Jersey May that has decided to justify all the patience required to endure the winter. We worked through the morning together, measuring, cutting, assembling, the comfortable silence of shared physical work. At one point, I looked up from the corner joint I was securing and found her watching me with an expression I recognized as one I had worn myself, standing in the doorway of her bedroom in February. Relief. Uncomplicated, unguarded relief. What? I said. Nothing, she said. You look good, Dad. You look like yourself. I thought about that. Whether the self she was seeing now was the same self as before, or a different one that had been through something and come out the other side, changed in ways that were not entirely losses. One that had learned, at 68, to unlock a door he had kept closed too long. I think I'm getting there, I said. Gerald was on the porch railing, watching us build his outdoor kingdom with an air of proprietorial satisfaction. He's going to destroy everything I plant, Amelia said. Probably, I agreed. Worth it, she said. And she was right. It was worth it. All of it. The fear, the 7 days of silence, the scratching at the door, the fever, the long, honest night, the therapy appointments and the difficult conversations, and the slow, imperfect work of learning to love each other without armor. It was all worth it. Because my daughter was standing in her garden in the May sunshine, planting things, getting better, calling me when it was hard, not just when it was manageable. Because I was 68 years old and still learning, which is the only thing more valuable than having already learned. Because somewhere in my kitchen, Miriam's photograph was on the counter, and that evening when I drove home I would tell her about the garden beds. And it would not be enough. It would never be enough. But it would be honest, and honest is what we had left, and honest was more than sufficient. It was everything. If you've made it to the very end of this story, I want to hear from you one final time. Drop a comment below. Tell me about a moment when silence between you and someone you loved finally broke open. Tell me about a door you finally unlocked. Tell me about the person who came to find you when you couldn't find a way to reach them. This story is about a father and a daughter, but really it's about every one of us who has ever confused protecting someone with letting them in. Those are not the same thing. And it is never too late, not at 32, not at 68, not ever, to learn the difference. Thank you for being here. Your comments mean more than you know. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.